What happens when one of Hollywood's brightest stars walks into a late-night interview expecting respect and walks out after being pushed to her absolute breaking point? In just 25 seconds, a single dismissive comment would unravel everything and expose a host's true colors in front of millions of viewers. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening. Jennifer Lawrence walked onto the stage with her usual confidence, waving to the cheering audience as she made her way to the guest chair. She'd done hundreds of these interviews before. This should have been easy. Just another night of promotion, another round of laughs and stories. But from the very first moment she sat down, something felt different. Stephen Colbert greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was an edge to his voice that Jennifer picked up on immediately. She'd learned to read people in this industry, and her instincts were telling her to be careful. "So, Jennifer, welcome back," Stephen said, leaning back in his chair like he owned not just the stage, but the entire building. "I see you're here to talk about your new project, though I have to wonder if anyone's really still interested." The audience gave an uncomfortable laugh. Jennifer's smile tightened just slightly, but she kept her composure. "Well, I certainly hope they are. We worked really hard on it." "I'm sure you did," Stephen replied, his tone dripping with something that wasn't quite sarcasm, but wasn't sincerity either. "You know, it's interesting. You've been in this business for, what, over a decade now? And yet you're still doing these press tours like you're some newcomer begging for attention." Jennifer blinked. The audience went quiet. That wasn't a joke. That was a dig, plain and simple. She straightened in her chair, her media training kicking in. "I think connecting with audiences is important, no matter how long you've been working. The fans deserve that." "The fans," Stephen repeated, making air quotes with his fingers. "Right. The fans. Tell me, Jennifer, do you ever get tired of playing the relatable girl next door? Because, let's be honest, you're worth millions. You live in a mansion. The whole 'I'm just like you' act must be exhausting to maintain." The audience was dead silent now. Jennifer's jaw clenched. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I've never claimed to be just like everyone else. I've been very open about my privilege and my success. But that doesn't mean I can't be genuine." "Genuine," Stephen said, drawing out the word like he was tasting something sour. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like a carefully crafted persona, designed to make you more marketable. Tell me, do you practice your candid moments in the mirror before interviews?" Jennifer's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "Excuse me?" "Oh, come on," Stephen continued, waving, his hand dismissively. "The tripping at award shows, the funny faces, the 'oops, I'm so clumsy' routine. It's all very calculated, isn't it? You're not fooling anyone with half a brain." The audience gasped. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't banter. This wasn't a comedy bit. This was a host attacking his guest on live television, and everyone could feel it. Jennifer took a deep breath. "I think you're confusing being authentic with being calculated. Yes, I've tripped at events. Yes, I make faces. Because I'm a human being, not a robot programmed to be perfect every second of the day. And if that bothers you, that says a lot more about you than it does about me." Stephen's smile turned cold. "Wow, defensive much? I'm just asking questions here. Isn't that my job? Or are you so used to softball interviews where everyone kisses your feet that you can't handle a real conversation?" "A real conversation?" Jennifer's voice rose slightly. "This isn't a conversation. You've been taking shots at me since I sat down. What exactly is your problem?" "My problem," Stephen said, leaning forward with that condescending smirk still plastered on his face, "is that I'm tired of celebrities coming on my show and expecting me to fawn all over them. You're here to promote something? Fine. But don't expect me to pretend you're some kind of saint just because you've been in a few successful movies." "I never asked you to pretend anything," Jennifer shot back. I came here to have a conversation about my work. Maybe share some stories. Make people laugh. You know, the normal thing that happens on a talk show. But instead, you've decided to use your platform to tear me down for no reason. No reason? Stephen laughed, but it was harsh and ugly. Maybe the reason is that someone needs to call out this manufactured authenticity. You're not special, Jennifer. You're an actor. You play pretend for a living. And yet, you've somehow convinced millions of people that you're their best friend. The audience was murmuring now. Some people were looking at each other in shock. Others had their phones out, already recording what was quickly becoming a disaster. Jennifer's face was flushed. You know what? I've sat through some uncomfortable interviews in my career. I've dealt with inappropriate questions, weird comments, all of it. But this is something else. You invited me here. You asked me to come on your show. And now you're treating me like I'm some kind of joke. Well, maybe if you didn't act like one, Stephen started, but Jennifer cut him off. No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to invite someone onto your show and then spend the entire time insulting them and trying to make them look bad. That's not clever. That's not edgy. That's just mean. Stephen rolled his eyes. Oh, please. This is show business. If you can't take the heat, maybe you should stick to making movies where you can have someone write your comebacks for you. That was it. That was the moment. Jennifer stood up from her chair so fast it almost tipped over. The audience let out a collective gasp. Are you serious right now? Jennifer's voice was shaking with anger. You think because you have a show and an audience that you can treat people however you want? That you can sit there and mock them and belittle them and it's okay because it's entertainment? Stephen held up his hands in mock surrender. Wow, someone sensitive. Sensitive? Jennifer's voice cracked. You've spent the last 10 minutes attacking everything about me. My work, my personality, my authenticity. And when I finally push back, I'm sensitive? Do you hear yourself? I hear myself just fine, Stephen said, his tone now openly hostile. What I'm hearing from you is someone who can't handle criticism. You're so used to everyone telling you how amazing you are that the second someone questions you, you fall apart. Criticism? Jennifer let out a bitter laugh. You call this criticism? You haven't said one thing about my actual work. You haven't asked about the film, about my character, about anything substantive. All you've done is make personal attacks and try to humiliate me in front of your audience. Maybe that's because there's nothing substantive to discuss, Stephen said with a shrug. It's just another movie, Jennifer. Another paycheck for you. Why should I pretend it's important? The audience was in complete shock. Some people were booing now. Others looked like they wanted to leave. This had gone so far beyond normal television that no one knew how to react. Jennifer grabbed her microphone and unclipped it from her dress. You know what the really sad part is? I actually used to respect you. I thought you were smart, funny, someone who used their platform for good. But now I see what you really are. You're just another insecure person who thinks tearing others down makes you look bigger. Oh, here we go, Stephen said, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes now. Maybe he was realizing he'd pushed too far. Maybe he was seeing the way his audience was turning on him. The moral high ground speech. It's not a speech, Jennifer said, her voice steady now despite the tears of frustration in her eyes. It's the truth. And the truth is, I don't have to sit here and take this. I don't have to smile and laugh while you insult me. I came here as a guest, and you've treated me like an enemy. Then maybe you should leave, Stephen said, crossing his arms. If you're so offended. Jennifer stared at him for a long moment. The entire studio was holding its breath. You know what? I will. Because I have too much respect for myself to stay somewhere I'm not respected. She dropped the microphone on the chair and turned to the audience. I'm sorry you all had to see this. This isn't what you came here for tonight. But I hope you understand why I can't stay." The audience burst into applause, not the polite, scheduled applause of a talk show, but genuine, supportive applause. People were standing up. Some were shouting words of encouragement. Jennifer felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she held her head high. Stephen sat frozen in his chair, clearly not expecting this reaction. "Jennifer, come on, sit back down. We're just having a conversation." "No," Jennifer said firmly, turning back to face him one last time. "A conversation requires mutual respect, and you've made it very clear you have none for me. So I'm done. I'm walking out of here, and I'm doing it because I know my worth, and it's not going to be determined by someone who thinks cruelty is comedy." "This is ridiculous," Stephen muttered, but his voice lacked conviction now. He could see the cameras still rolling, capturing every second of his humiliation. "You're being overdramatic." "Overdramatic?" Jennifer's eyes flashed. "You spent the entire interview trying to break me down, and when I refuse to break, I'm overdramatic? No, I'm standing up for myself. Something you clearly have a problem with." She started walking toward the exit. The audience was still applauding, some even cheering. Stephen called out after her, "Jennifer, wait, let's just..." But she didn't wait. She didn't turn around. She walked straight through the backstage entrance and disappeared from view, leaving Stephen Colbert sitting alone on his stage, facing an audience that was no longer on his side. The studio fell into chaos. Producers were running around, trying to figure out what to do. The audience was buzzing with conversation, phones out, capturing everything. Stephen sat there, his face red, his carefully constructed confidence crumbling. "Well," he said weakly, trying to laugh it off, "I guess we'll take an early commercial break." But no one was laughing. The damage was done. In the span of one interview, Stephen had shown his true colors. He'd taken a respected guest and tried to humiliate her for no reason other than his own ego. And Jennifer Lawrence had refused to be his victim. Backstage, Jennifer was surrounded by crew members offering support. Her publicist rushed over, asking if she was okay. Jennifer wiped her tears and nodded. "I'm fine, I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't let him treat me like that." "You did the right thing," her publicist said, squeezing her shoulder. "Everyone saw what he did." And they had. Within minutes, clips of the interview were spreading across social media. People were outraged at Stephen's behavior. They were praising Jennifer for standing up for herself, for refusing to be bullied on live television. The narrative was clear, and it wasn't in Stephen's favor. Back on the stage, Stephen was trying to regroup. The show came back from commercial, but the energy was completely different. The audience was cold, distant. They'd witnessed something ugly, and they knew who was responsible. Stephen attempted to continue with the show, bringing out his next guest, but it was clear his mind was elsewhere. He kept glancing at the empty chair where Jennifer had been sitting. He kept stumbling over his words, losing his train of thought. The confident, controlled host from earlier in the evening was gone. Meanwhile, Jennifer was in her dressing room, taking deep breaths and processing what had just happened. She'd walked out of interviews before, but never like this. Never in front of a live audience, on a major network show. Part of her was scared about the potential backlash, but a larger part of her felt liberated. She'd spent years in this industry, learning to play the game, to smile through uncomfortable moments, to laugh off inappropriate comments. But tonight, something in her had snapped. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of being treated as less than. Maybe it was the blatant disrespect in Stephen's tone. Maybe it was just the right moment for her to finally say, enough is enough. Whatever it was, she didn't regret it. She looked at herself in the mirror, at her tear-streaked makeup and her determined expression, and she felt proud. Proud for standing up for herself. Proud for showing that even celebrities, even successful actresses, don't have to tolerate abuse. Her phone was blowing up with messages. fellow actors texting their support, friends checking in to make sure she was okay, her manager calling to discuss next steps. But Jennifer silenced her phone and just sat there for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade. She thought about all the young women who might see this, all the people who'd been in situations where they were disrespected and felt like they had to just take it. She hoped they would see her walking out and realize they had that power too. They could say no. They could leave. They didn't owe anyone their presence, especially not people who treated them poorly. Back in the studio, the show was limping toward its conclusion. Steven's energy was completely off. He wasn't making eye contact with the camera. He wasn't engaging with his guest the way he normally would. The whole evening had been derailed, and everyone knew it. When the show finally ended, Steven immediately left the stage. No goodbyes to the audience. No usual post-show routine. He went straight to his dressing room and closed the door. Inside, he sat in silence, staring at the wall. For the first time in a long time, Stephen Colbert had to confront what he'd done. He'd let his ego, his need to appear edgy and unfiltered, override basic human decency. He'd invited a guest onto his show for the express purpose of tearing her down, and it had backfired spectacularly. The internet was already on fire with reactions. Hashtags were trending. Think pieces were being written in real time, and the consensus was clear. Jennifer Lawrence was the hero of the evening. Stephen Colbert was the villain. Jennifer finally left the studio, walking out the back entrance to avoid any cameras. Her car was waiting for her, and she slid into the back seat, finally allowing herself to fully relax. Her publicist had already confirmed that the public response was overwhelmingly in her favor. People were calling her brave, strong, inspiring. As the car pulled away from the studio, Jennifer looked back at the building one last time. She thought about how she'd walked in there a few hours ago, expecting a normal interview, and how she was leaving, having made a statement that would be talked about for years to come. She'd shown that respect isn't negotiable, that being a guest on someone's show doesn't mean you surrender your dignity, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a situation that's designed to diminish you. The city lights blurred past the car window as Jennifer headed home. Tomorrow would bring more conversations, more media coverage, more analysis of what had happened. But tonight, she just wanted to be alone with her thoughts. She'd face down a bully in front of millions of people and come out stronger for it. Stephen, meanwhile, was still in his dressing room, finally checking his phone and seeing the tsunami of negative reactions. Every major news outlet was covering the story. Every social media platform was discussing it. And none of it was painting him in a positive light. He'd made a critical error. He'd underestimated Jennifer Lawrence. He'd thought he could push her around, make her squirm, get some viral moments out of her discomfort. Instead, she'd flipped the script entirely. She'd taken control of the situation and exposed him for exactly what he was. A host who thought his position gave him the right to be cruel. The producers were already in emergency meetings, trying to figure out damage control. But what could they really do? The footage was out there. Millions of people had watched it live. Millions more would watch the clips online. There was no walking this back. Jennifer's phone eventually came back to life with notifications, and she scrolled through some of the messages. One from a young actress she'd mentored. "You're my hero. Thank you for showing us we don't have to take that treatment." Another from a director she'd worked with. "That took guts. Proud of you." Message after message of support and admiration. She put the phone down and looked out the window again. The confrontation kept replaying in her mind. Stephen's sneering tone. The audience's shocked reactions. The moment she stood up and decided she was done. It all felt surreal, like it had happened to someone else. But it had happened to her, and she'd handled it the only way she could. With honesty, with strength, and with a refusal to be diminished. She'd walked into that studio as Jennifer Lawrence, the movie star. She'd walked out as Jennifer Lawrence, the person who wouldn't tolerate disrespect, no matter who it came from. The car pulled up to her house, and Jennifer thanked her driver before heading inside. She kicked off her heels, washed off her makeup, and changed into comfortable clothes. The simple act of being in her own space, away from cameras and audiences and hostile hosts, felt like a relief. She made herself some tea and sat on her couch, finally processing everything that had happened. The fear she'd felt when Steven started attacking her. The anger that had built up with each dismissive comment. The moment of clarity when she realized she didn't have to stay. The liberation of walking away. It had been one of the most intense experiences of her career, and that was saying something. But she didn't regret it. Not for a second. She'd done what so many people wish they could do when they're being mistreated. She'd stood up, spoken her truth, and left with her dignity intact. Steven was having a very different evening. Alone in his dressing room, he kept replaying the interview in his mind, seeing it now through different eyes. The way Jennifer's face had changed when he started in on her. The audience's uncomfortable silence. The applause when she decided to leave. It all looked different now, without the adrenaline and ego clouding his judgment. He'd thought he was being clever, provocative, interesting, but he'd just been cruel. There was no other word for it. He'd invited someone onto his show with the intention of making them uncomfortable, and he'd succeeded. But the cost was far higher than he'd anticipated. His phone kept buzzing with calls from network executives, producers, his own team. Everyone wanted to talk about what had happened, what it meant for the show, what the next steps should be. But Steven ignored them all. He wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. He needed to sit with what he'd done. Back at her house, Jennifer was starting to feel the exhaustion of the evening catch up with her. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her drained. She finished her tea and decided to try to get some sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring a whole new wave of attention and discussion. As she lay in bed, she thought about all the times she'd bitten her tongue in interviews, all the inappropriate questions she'd answered with grace, all the uncomfortable moments she'd laughed off. She'd played the game for so long, trying to be the good guest, the easy interview, the likable celebrity. But tonight had shown her something important. You could be all of those things and still have boundaries. You could be kind and professional and still demand respect. Walking away didn't make you difficult or dramatic. Sometimes it made you brave. The studio was empty now, dark except for the exit signs. The chairs were put away, the lights were off, and the stage where so much drama had unfolded was silent. But the impact of what had happened there would echo far beyond those walls. Jennifer Lawrence had walked out of Stephen Colbert's show, and in doing so, she'd walked into a new chapter of her career. One where she wouldn't accept being diminished. One where she knew her worth and wouldn't let anyone make her forget it. One where respect wasn't a luxury, but a requirement. And somewhere in his dressing room, Stephen Colbert was learning a hard lesson about what happens when you forget that the people you interview are human beings who deserve dignity, not targets for your ego. The entitled host had met someone who refused to play his game, and the collision had left him sitting alone in the wreckage of his own making. The night had started like any other talk show taping. It had ended with one woman standing up for herself and walking away from disrespect, leaving behind a host who finally had to face the consequences of his actions. No clever editing could save this. No spin could change what millions had witnessed. Jennifer Lawrence had made her statement, and it was one that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling